Hey guys! Did you know that I like Fire Emblem? Yes, I've talked about this series before, but I can't help it. These games are just so much fun to me. The second I start playing one, I'm hooked until the end credits roll. The first game we got in the West was the 7th installment, The Blazing Sword. What we didn't know at the time was that Blazing Sword was actually a prequel to the 6th game, The Binding Blade. This meant that Japanese audiences knew that the cliffhanger Blazing Sword ended on was already resolved. Rather than just translating Binding Blade and releasing it overseas, Nintendo decided to move forward and got to work on the next one. Those who expected a sequel to Blazing Sword were surprised when the game that followed it had no connection whatsoever. Thus, we were introduced to Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones is an often overlooked entry in the franchise. It came out on the Game Boy Advance 6 months after the Nintendo DS was released. The DS offered a more interesting control scheme, a rechargeable battery, and a bigger backlit screen. Audiences were more interested in checking out the fresh experiences on this new console rather than picking up a niche game on a handheld that was antiquated even when it launched. Beyond just the release time, Sacred Stones is an oddity in the entire franchise. It's a standalone game that is sandwiched between two epic sagas. In fact, Sacred Stones is the only Fire Emblem game that is not connected to the rest of the series in any way. When it was released in 2005, Sacred Stones received fairly positive reviews, but it was quickly forgotten and isn't really talked about much these days. Even within the fanbase, it just came and went very suddenly. Now, I remember really enjoying Sacred Stones when I first played it, so I wanted to revisit it with a more critical eye and figure out if it was forgotten for a good reason, or if it's actually a hidden gem in the franchise. Is it good? Is it bad? There's only one way to find out. This is Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones takes place on the continent of Magvel. The world is divided into 6 separate countries: Frelia, Renes, Grotto, Carcino, Roston, and Jahana. Long ago, the land was being overtaken by monsters, forcing mankind to near extinction. In desperation, the humans appealed to the heavens for assistance. Their request was granted and they were given 5 stones with the power to dispel evil. By harvesting these powers, mankind was able to take back their land and imprison the Demon King's soul within one of these stones. The stones were then individually entrusted to one of the land's 5 heroes, who would each go on to become rulers of their own country. They were sealed away and humanity proceeded to live in peace for the next 800 years. This all changes at the beginning of the game, where we see that Grotto has launched a surprise attack on Renes. Here we are introduced to Rene's princess and one of our main characters, Erika. During the invasion, her father orders his troops to stand down and entrusts his advisor Seth to protect Erika and bring her to safety. The king stays behind to confront the Grotto army so he can try and understand why his old allies would attack him. Seth and Erika escape to Frelia, where Erika learns that her father has been slain and her country has been overthrown. Though devastated, she decides that she is going to head back towards Renes and Grotto to find her brother, Prince Ephraim. We soon cut to Ephraim, who is leading his small band of troops into guerrilla warfare with the Grotto Empire in order to disrupt their takeover and to keep them from pursuing Erika. Though his team is small and outmatched, his leadership skills grant them many small victories. As the 2 siblings follow through with their plans, they both discover that undead monsters have started to reappear in the wild for the first time in centuries. During Erika's search for her brother, she learns that the Emperor of Grotto is on a mission to invade every country in Magvel and destroy their sacred stone, thus signifying the return of the imprisoned Demon King. Neither sibling understands what the Emperor's motivation is. Their confused feelings are amplified by the fact that his son, Prince Lion, is one of their closest friends and someone who would never endure such violent and underhanded tactics. When the siblings reunite, they form an alliance with the royal family of Frelia. Together, the group determines their next course of action. Erika is tasked with going to Roston to inform them of the impending attack. Prince Ines heads to Jahana to do the same, and Ephraim decides to attack Grotto directly. The 2 siblings part ways again and set off on their new mission. It's up to Ephraim and Erika to retake their kingdom, protect the sacred stones, and stop the Empire from plunging the world into chaos. At this point, the player must choose which of the siblings they will follow for the rest of the game. This will affect how you see the story unfold and will give you a slightly different understanding of some characters' motivations and backstories. No matter which of the two you choose, you will retain your current party of characters. Some units can be recruited during either route, while a few are exclusive for story reasons. The player won't have to worry too much about missing out on these story-exclusive units for long because Ephraim and Erica reunite later in the game, thus giving you access to every character. However, even after the reunion, there are still differences between the stories going forward. As far as the story goes, Sacred Stones is pretty simple and easy to follow. This isn't a negative because it is well done, the characters are likable, the world is comprehensible, and the overall story is engaging enough. But none of it is really exceptional. There's nothing in this game that breaks new ground or does anything particularly unexpected. It's a very surface level experience, which is fine. This simplicity is a bit more noticeable here than in Blazing Sword, but I think it's because the characters in Sacred Stones lack the same charm as the ones in that game. Ephraim and Erica are fine, but they are nowhere near as charismatic as Lynn, Hector, and Ellie would. Plus, they spend the majority of the game apart from each other, so we don't get a good feel of their chemistry or insight on their family dynamic. And there's a couple of story points that don't really make much sense to me. I'm not sure why the truth about the siblings' bracelet was kept secret from them. It doesn't seem to offer any benefit. In fact, when Erica's bracelet gets stolen, she opts to just forget about it and move on because she doesn't know what it really is. That could have been a catastrophic mistake if Seth didn't insist on getting it back. The storytelling in Sacred Stones is a little spotty at points. A few interesting events happen within the plot that are downplayed, sometimes in a cheap way. We never really get a good understanding of how Ephraim escaped Valter, and the introduction of the character Myrrh is almost completely glossed over. There are some moments that should feel epic, but they end up feeling very anticlimactic. I think a big reason for this is because of the lack of in-game portraits. Blazing Sword used these to emphasize the importance of specific moments. It was a simple but effective way to enhance and mix up the storytelling. For whatever reason, Sacred Stones doesn't do this. I don't understand this decision because they do have portraits, but they are only shown during the credits. This isn't an MCU movie. None of us are staying to watch the credits. We know Ephraim isn't going to get a visit from Nick Fury, and I'm definitely not sitting through these on a system that needs AA batteries. I like the idea of the branching paths because it offers replay value, but this is something that I feel needed to be divided up better. I say this because out of the two routes, Erica's really feels like a side story. Her mission as a messenger is not interesting compared to her brothers, and since she doesn't get involved with the Emperor directly, she misses out on some very big plot revelations. If you pick Erica's route, you are told about them, you do not experience them. Because of this, her route just comes off as uneventful. Adding to this feeling is the fact that her route is easier than her brother's. So if you go with her, you get an underwhelming story and less engaging gameplay. The whole time you'll wish you went with Ephraim instead. And since she was our first playable lord, it kinda makes it feel like the game started off on the wrong foot. Compounding on this fact is that Erica is not as good as her brother in combat, and character-wise, she's kind of dumb. There's a specific point in the story where the sibling you choose is confronted by a major villain and has to make a decision. Ephraim's is done against his will, whereas Erica is easily manipulated. It makes her come off as naive and stupid. Keep in mind that Erica is not a bad character, she's just kind of blandly good, so her missteps will really stand out when they happen. Ephraim's route is superior in almost every way. Ephraim is stronger, has a more interesting journey, and his chapters are a little more challenging. He's also a bit more engaging than his sister and is a much more competent leader. The revelation at the end of his journey was far more compelling and felt like an actual conclusion. It wasn't especially shocking, but at least it was something. It gave me a solid arc, which I didn't get out of Erica's campaign. Some of you may say that Erica's naivety and inferior battle skills is because she doesn't have the same combat or leadership experience as her brother, and there's definitely some validity to that. What I would have done to make her campaign better is make her route the more difficult one. This would play into her lack of experience, and maybe during her journey, she would have to recruit other troops and grow into a leader before she confronts a major leader of the Grotto Empire. The Grotto army itself has some interesting villains, particularly their military leaders. The original three generals, Duessel, Selena, and Glenn, are portrayed as honorable warriors devoted to their country and protecting its people. The new ones, Valter, Kalek, and Riev, are cold-hearted, manipulative killers who could care less about anyone but themselves. The contrast between the old generals and the new ones raises serious questions over the Emperor's current state of mind. Very little is known about the Emperor initially because he rarely speaks. When he does, it's brief, cold, and emotionless. There's a reason for this involving other villains, but that's technically a spoiler, so if you want to avoid that, skip to this time. So after Ephraim kills the Emperor, we learn that he was actually being controlled by his son Prince Lion. Lion is the one who really wanted to start the war in the first place. This comes as a shock to both siblings because not only is Lion their closest friend, but he is also someone who has always had a very kind heart. More information is revealed to the player when they meet a grotto mage named Noel. A year prior to the war, Emperor Valkyrie actually died from a long-standing illness. Lion was incredibly distraught over his father's death. He was alone, lost, and doubtful of his own abilities. He didn't feel he was ready to lead an entire country, and his passive nature put him at odds with the requirements of being an emperor. In desperation, a grief-stricken Lion kept the emperor's death a secret and began experimenting with the sacred stone of Grotto. This stone was used to seal the soul of the Demon King, making it the most powerful of them all. Lion's hope was to harness this power to bring his father back, and if this was successful, he would go on to use the stone to save other lives. At one point, the stone split in half. One half was normal, but the other one became something called the Dark Stone. Lion used the power of the Dark Stone and was successfully able to revive his father. However, the Emperor came back as a living corpse with no soul. He was just a mindless puppet. The use of the Dark Stone changed Lion's personality drastically. He destroyed the Sacred Stone of Grotto and then used his father's living corpse to order the Grotto army to attack the other countries and destroy their stones as well. Anyone who objected to this was killed without any hesitation. The party knows they must stop him at all costs, even though they still don't know what Lion's motivation is. This question hangs in the air for a few chapters before the full truth comes out. When Lion used the Dark Stone, he tapped into a power that was sealed away ages ago. His ritual may have revived his father, but it also allowed his body to be possessed by the soul of the Demon King. For the last year, everything he has done has been influenced and orchestrated by this ancient evil. The Demon King wants to destroy all the stones so nothing can stop him from transferring his soul back into his original body, allowing him to wreak havoc on the land once again. So the Emperor was a puppet controlled by Lion, who is another puppet controlled by the Demon King. Lion is basically the middle part of this satanic human centipede from hell. I'm honestly fairly mixed on this whole thing. I don't mind the Demon King aspect of the story. In fact, I love how the struggle between Lion and the Demon King is portrayed. At times, Lion is completely evil, cold, and taunting. At other times, he speaks kind and softly, but you can tell that there is a clear manipulation happening. There are also instances where the Demon King is pretending to be Lion, and even points when the real Lion comes out and apologizes for everything. I love this dynamic because unless Lion just looks evil, we're never really sure who's in control. Erica's route portrays this possession as a sort of Jekyll and Hyde scenario, while Ephraim's portrays it as Lion being internally manipulated. I like it more in Ephraim's route because there are times where the Jekyll and Hyde approach is used there as well, and I think that makes the confusion of who is really talking even more apparent. I love the struggle between these two personalities, but my issue with it is that it's a struggle between two pretty one-dimensional characters. The Demon King being shallow doesn't bother me because, he's called the Demon King. I wasn't exactly expecting him to be open to pleasant conversations. My problem with Lion is that he is portrayed as way too angelic. I understand that this is his character, but Jesus Christ, every flashback between him and the siblings is him talking about helping people and how great the two of them are and how he wishes he could be them. They're really driving this point home. All that's missing is a scene of Lion hanging from the cross. Plus, we had no time with this character before this reveal, so we have no attachment to him. I would have liked it if Lion was shown sooner so we could have had more time to see other aspects of his personality, or even just see him talk to people normally. I think this could have been done by having Lion join up with Ephraim and Erica early on with some lie that he was outcasted by the Emperor and that he had tried to stop his father but couldn't, sort of like Guinevere in Binding Blade. Then he could have traveled with us, we get to see more interactions between him and his childhood friends, and then his betrayal could be revealed right after Valkyrie was defeated. As it is, there's little that makes the player actually care about Lion. He's not a terrible antagonist, but he's just not that interesting on his own. The resolution between him, our heroes, and the Demon King feels very anticlimactic. The final boss fights with them aren't especially difficult, and the story logic behind how they weaken the Demon King is really underwhelming. If the boss had 2 phases that justified this, I wouldn't mind it as much, but let's just say that the final fight feels about as mindless as the enemy you're facing. For the most part, the story of Sacred Stones is good. It has a few hiccups in the way that it is told, but it's still an engaging and enjoyable experience. There's a clear imbalance in the 2 campaigns that could have been ironed out, and while the characters aren't particularly amazing, they are still charming and likable enough to carry you through your journey. Sacred Stones is identical to Blazing Sword in almost every way. Many of the qualities in that game were carried over here as well. The art design, the wonderful animations, the catchy music, it's all here. This is also true for the gameplay. It has many of the same mechanics, albeit done better. Since I already went into detail on Blazing Sword's gameplay, I'm not going to repeat myself here. You can watch that video if you want to get the gist of it. Instead, I'm going to go over all the new features that were added to Sacred Stones. The first notable one is the addition of the world map. This was the first use of a world map since Fire Emblem Gaiden, thus making it the first one seen by a Western audience. In between chapters, the player can visit shops, fight monsters on previously defeated maps, or navigate to the next story chapter. I love this feature. In the last 2 games, if you saw a shop on the field, you'd have to waste turns and risk getting killed just to check out their inventory because you never knew when you'd see another one. And there was nothing more disappointing than going through hell and high water to get to a shop, only to realize they had nothing good. Here, you can revisit every single one and you don't feel forced to try and get to it before the chapter ends. This is a huge improvement over the last 2 GBA titles. Sacred Stones also has monster units, another first since Gaiden. These things are generally pretty easy to kill and aren't included in the weapon triangle, making them ideal for leveling up weaker party members. Of course they appear throughout the main story, but they will also appear on the world's map between chapters. Sometimes they will obstruct the player's path, forcing you to fight them in order to progress. Other times, you can fight them if you want to get some of your lower level characters up to par with the rest of your team. You can also do this at the Tower of Valny, a special map with multiple floors dedicated to fighting monsters, leveling up your units, and obtaining treasure. Later in the game, the Lagdu ruins appear with even stronger enemies for the player to get experience from. So with all of that in mind, it's clear that Sacred Stones boils down to one simple thing. This is great because you don't have to worry about missing out on characters with a lot of potential who join underleveled. The Elite games were very guilty of giving you low-leveled units at later points in the story. Many of them had great growth rates, but it meant you had to really feed them kills and keep them safe at a point where they could easily be one-shotted by any enemy. Sacred Stones does this so much better because with the freedom to grind between chapters, you can pause the story and feed these weaker characters tons of experience. Granted, this could increase the amount of time you sink into the game, but I don't think it's that bad. Leveling up is made easier by the fact that Sacred Stones has less characters than the last 2 games, so making almost all of your units viable is not a daunting task. This freedom to grind is especially useful for the new trainee units. These are characters that are very weak but are able to be promoted twice, so they are able to level up more than your regular units and can eventually become very viable party members. There are 3 trainees in the game. 2 of them have potential to outshine some of your characters and become damage dealing powerhouses. The other one is Amelia. Don't use her. She sucks. The trainee units promote at level 10 to their first class, which brings me to the promotions in this game. Like the Elite titles, Sacred Stones requires the use of an item to change classes. The difference here is that you can actually pick between 2 different promotions. A character like Joshua, who starts off as a Myrmidon, can either be promoted to a Swordmaster or an Assassin. Naomi can become a Sniper or a Ranger. LaRachel can become a Valkyrie or a Mage Knight. The list goes on, but almost every character has a choice in which class they change into. Since the trainee units are a class below the rest of the characters, they have even more options. Iwan can first be promoted to a mage or a shaman. As a mage, he can promote into a sage or a mage knight, and as a shaman, he can promote into a summoner or a druid. So in total, Iwan himself has 7 different classes. This promotion system complements the story very well because the game already encourages a second playthrough, so being able to reuse the characters you liked in different ways makes replaying it still feel pretty fresh. It's a great system that we wouldn't see expanded upon again until Awakening 8 years later. Sometimes these promotions seem like no-brainers. You might ask yourself, why would I make Archer a bishop and keep him restricted to light magic when I can make him a sage and give him access to elemental magic? Well, some classes have certain skills that make up for their shortcomings. Bishops get a skill called Slayer, which makes your magic deal extra damage to monsters and undead creatures. With this skill, someone like Archer could decimate the Lagdu ruins easily. Wyvern Knights don't get to use swords like Wyvern Lords, but they get the skill Pierce, which ignores the enemy's defense stat, making quick work of Armored Knights. Not all the skills are great though. The Summoner class lets you conjure up weak phantoms that you can use to bait enemies or block their path forward, but it's not super useful and keeps you locked into using slow, dark magic, so the trade-off doesn't seem worth it. Since there are many units in the game that start off as the same class, it's easy to promote the two differently and see which you find more useful, and since you can freely level grind, you're only missing out if you decide to, or if you just lack the promotional seals. Spending time level grinding also makes it easier for you to increase your support levels with other units, but here's where we come to all the things that Sacred Stones didn't approve upon from its predecessors. Once again, you are only allowed 5 support conversations per character, which I still feel is an absolute asinine decision. I don't know why this was in all the GBA games, but I'm very happy it was done away with. Another thing not improved upon is the arena. If you lose in the arena, that character will still come down with a case of the old permadeath. The arena is the only part of a Fire Emblem game where I feel there should be no permadeath. It should just incapacitate your character for the remainder of the battle. Killing them outright just feels like an unnecessary punishment. Unlike the last 2 games, there are no side chapters in Sacred Stones. This is probably because the player may already feel that they're missing out on some content when they have to choose which route they take, and adding secret chapters on top of that may have just been overkill. The map design in this game is mostly good. While not super diverse, the layouts are fairly well thought out, and the obstacles you have to overcome can be challenging, but not too rage-inducing. They are often structured in a way where you will want to split your party up, but it usually leads to a feeling of satisfaction when you reach your objective. There's only a few where the layout isn't too great. Chapter 20 lets you bring 18 units to the fields, but the way forward is elongated and tedious, and as a result, you end up making all 18 characters move 2 or 3 tiles per turn. This can be mitigated by using flying units, but there's 4 in the whole game and only 2 of them are really worth a damn, so it's still not the most enjoyable experience. The most irritating one to me was the second floor in the Tower of Valny. The second half of this map includes a narrow hallway to the top that forces you to cram all your characters in a single file line. Since you'll probably go through the Tower of Valny multiple times, you end up having to go through this map again and again, and you'll get sick of it real fast. Literally, making this hallway 2 tiles wide would have made this so much more bearable. Of course, the Tower of Valny is optional, so the player can avoid it if they don't feel like grinding there. And to be honest, leveling up is not that essential in Sacred Stones because this game is on the easier side out of the GBA titles. I'm pretty indifferent towards the difficulty of this game. I'm glad it doesn't pull too many cheap tricks like Binding Blade, but I'm also thankful that it's not laughably easy like Fates. It's easier than Blazing Sword. One of the only things I didn't like difficulty-wise is that during the last fight, many of your units without legendary weapons will be sidelined because they won't be able to do respectable damage to the final boss. I know this is to encourage the player to make a varied party, but it's still kinda lame to see a character that's been crushing enemies suddenly become useless because they don't have a specific weapon. But that's probably the only thing I didn't like difficulty-wise. I thought the rest of it was pretty fair. Once you beat the game, you unlock something called Creature Campaign. Here, you can freely battle in the Tower of Valny and the Lagdu Ruins. If you complete certain objectives, you can unlock characters that were not playable in the story like Valter, Selena, even Lion. It's kind of like Binding Blade's trial maps, but way better. There's more maps to fight on, and unlocking these secret characters doesn't require playing through the whole story a million times. It's a cool little bit of optional content, but I wasn't into it. Why would I go through the effort of unlocking all these cool characters when I won't be able to use them against any opponents that are worth a damn? It's more of a novelty than anything else. That's really everything I had to say. The only thing left for me to do is to list my top 5 favorite units. As per usual with these lists, I am not including the Lords. So, my top 5 favorite units are... Ross. Starting off as a trainee unit, Ross will outshine his father in the late game and will decimate most enemies you put in front of him. Garrick. A very well-rounded and versatile character that you'll put on the front lines almost immediately. Joshua. I'm a sucker for Swordmasters, so his mere existence was enough for me to put him here. Franz. One of my more useful units, able to dish out twice the amount of damage he takes with reliable mobility throughout the whole game. And my favorite unit in the game is... LaRachel. The biggest shock was how much I loved using her. Like the previous GBA games, staff-locked characters require excessive grinding to promote, but once she did, she made quick work of almost everyone with a solid evasion rate. While she's not as good as Clarine from Binding Blade, she is still a very useful character to have on the field. Plus, her overly righteous sense of justice is just far too charming to leave her on the bench. So while it's not the best Fire Emblem game, Sacred Stones is another solid entry in the series. It takes all the mechanics that its predecessors laid out and expands upon that foundation. Yes, it does this mostly by reintroducing older features the West never saw before, but the way they blend together here creates for a smooth and enjoyable playing experience. This refined gameplay helps push you through a narrative experience that can shortly be summed up as good but not great. The final score for Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones is an 8 out of 10. I think its strongest quality is that while it's not the best game in the series, it's definitely the most replayable one. The simple story, coupled with the amount of player choice and a manageable amount of characters, makes replaying it feel somewhat fresh every time. Plus the fact that it's an isolated story that is not connected to the other games means you get a complete experience without making you feel like you're missing out on some lore rabbit hole. It's one that I would recommend to newcomers who want to have a classic Fire Emblem experience without going through the tutorial in Blazing Sword. If you haven't played it yet, give it a shot. It might win you over. It's a great game that deserves some love. Even after playing it, it's hard to understand why it's been overlooked by the fanbase. Oh. Wait. Maybe it's because it doesn't have Lyn. It doesn't have Lyn.